And so the provocative thing that I'll say is we need to get the right people at the table. The people that are at the table in this country conversing with company managements aren't the people that are making the actual investment decisions. They support those that are making the decisions, and oftentimes they approach it from the moral or ethical perspective. Now, many of you may be saying, well, yeah, of course, it is the moral and it is the ethical thing to do. But investors want to make money. That's what they're in the business to do. They're in the business to make money for their shareholders. They're in the business to make money for the people that entrust them with the money. I've been given marching orders at the church. My sole responsibility is to look out for the interests of those that I serve. I'm not required to invest in a moral and ethical manner. I've asked to make a conscious effort to do so, and we take that very seriously. We make a real conscious effort. But the reality is that we will significantly move things forward when investors get religion that good environmental, social, and governance practice is good for business, and they can make the case that it's good for business. One of the things that we do is to convince companies like P&G and others to measure the impact that they have on the environment. And of course, you've all heard what gets measured gets managed. And Len talked about ways that P&G has effectively managed its environmental footprint. This country is a bit unique. We're behind the rest of the world. I mean, I feel very confident in saying that we are behind the rest of the world when it comes to investors, people that make the actual decisions, engaging companies in terms of making the business case. You go to Europe, you go to Australia, you even go to Brazil, and investors are sitting at the table and asking the question, what are you doing to ensure the long-term sustainability and to mitigate the effects of climate change? The investors, the people that make the investment decisions in this country, are woefully behind in asking those questions. And we have to convince those people in charge of the money that it's in their interest, it's in their participants and their stakeholders' interest to advance an agenda that focuses on the environment.
So why is it that the investors here are not at the table?
I'll call it American skepticism. If it's something that's good, then by definition, if it's a moral and ethical right, then by definition it must be a bad investment. And so there's this inherent bias, and I equate it to how people viewed people of color and women 50, 60 years ago. Oh, that person's a member of minority class. They can't possibly do as good of a job as someone else. It's if the case is being made that this is the right thing to do from a moral and ethical perspective, then it can't possibly be good for business.
And I can give you a suggestion on how to position some of this stuff that I have found effective. I mentioned to you about how we use sustainability to help build the business, top line growth, bottom line. That's largely short-term, mid-term things. If you think of sustainability and the issues that we're dealing with, a lot of them are based on the concept of growth. You know, a lot of the issues we have are due to growth. And if you look at a company like P&G, it won't be successful unless it can grow. You know, individuals aren't successful unless we can grow. Nations will not be successful unless they can grow. So this whole idea of growth gets captured into this. And we're not going to be able to grow uneventfully unless we do it responsibly and sustainably. So that allows you to take the business case from the short and midterm and add a long-term component to it, which I think, you know, as you work with companies as investors, you are looking at long-term success of those corporations as much as the short term.
Let me take things back to, there's a couple of strands here that I find really interesting with regards to the role of religion and what the ultimate interlinkage is between market and morality. And it seems to me that there's been a big shift in the scholarly literature on the question of the commons. So we treat the climate, the global climate change, as an issue of the global atmospheric commons, just as we treat water issues as an issue of the water commons. And so part of the sustainability question is how to best manage that commons. And the traditional literature for most of the 20th century said that left to their own devices, people acting in self-interested, uncoordinated ways would produce a tragedy of the commons. They would overexploit it, they would abuse it, they would create carbon emissions to the point that exceed the carbon budget that we've been given by the IPCC, and as a result, we would produce a collectively irrational outcome. And so the present course that we're on is one that business as usual cannot succeed. There obviously needs to be some change, and the question is how we can achieve collective action to restrain ourselves from this carbon-intensive economic mode. Where religion comes in, it seems to me, is that in this mother of all collective action problems, we have seen in the last few years an incredible breakthrough. In my lifetime, it's certainly the most astonishing one, and most people do not know about it. This is a breakthrough that covers more than half of humanity, potentially. It's something known as the Common Word Document. The Common Word Document is an invitation, an authoritative invitation from the most diverse, most authoritative, widely respected collection of Muslim scholars in the world to the Christian community and implicitly also the Jewish community of the world to collaborate collectively for the common good. And it is a call to collective action, and it overcomes so much of the preliminaries that we find ourselves caught in and so much of the mutual misunderstanding. And it's a major step forward in this constitutional reset. So much of my interest is in how that constitutional foundation can produce the kind of religious impetus among investors, among the social responsibility thinking of corporations and sustainability officers to produce the kinds of change that will help mitigate and help adaptation to the carbon-caused realities we're facing.
Part of the theme I'm hearing here is based in views about what's possible, right? What's possible for a company to do successfully and grow and afford, and what's possible for an investor to expect and achieve and hope for and still be ethical and sort of make decisions that feel good to their hearts. And a level of collaboration that's possible, right? When you all have worked in the sort of arena of what's possible, how have you in the work so far, how have you overcome those hurdles to get to what's possible, whether it comes to business practice or investing or people working together differently?
I'll jump in. I think that when you think about what's possible, I think first working in an interfaith context is an enormous privilege because I spent 18 years on Wall Street. I spent 5 years making beer cans as a chemical engineer. I'm not making this up. And working in the investment arena with perhaps the longest term institutional investors. You know, when you are a pension fund leader, you have generations of beneficiaries to think about. When you are a faith-based investor, you're frequently thinking about eternity. So that idea of possibility, first of all, is a kind of stubborn bridge between faith and reason. I think that what is so interesting about our work is that we begin what we say through the lens of faith, where we think about what's just, we think about what's sustainable. But we live in the world. We live in the world, and we try to ramp back from those possibilities to create steps that will allow society to get there. And in the case of a particular industry or a particular company, we will say, instead of saying, this is a bad company, we won't talk to them, we see the possibility that all companies are run by individuals, and that wherever they are, if we make a strong business case, if we make a strong moral case, we don't really care why they change, why they become more just, why they become more sustainable, What we care about is that they change. And I think if ICCR has changed at all over the last decade or so, it's in embracing the kind of pragmatism that I think Dave Zellner is calling us to embrace, where you say, if a company changes for your reason, great. If a company sees the possibilities and is visionary, strategic, great. But what's important is that the company reduces its carbon footprint. What's important is the company is more transparent in its reporting. What's important is the company is creative and innovative around energy use. And so I think letting go of the desire for people to have a conversion experience and actually saying, you know, this could be good for you too. Let's think of the business case. Let's think of this. I think that's where we gain the most traction and we close in on those possibilities.
And I think, too, this may be a time where they talk about how sometimes the environmental and the social sustainability issues kind of come together, and you started to touch on that. First off, we're always hiring packaging engineers if you want to come back, you know. You'll have to switch from cans to bottles, but I think you could probably do that, you know. But where the environmental and the social come together, and the example I'll give is palm oil. And the deforestation associated with palm oil. It's been a big issue for probably the last 10 to 15 years, and it's an issue of growth, as I've talked about earlier. The amount of palm oil used in the world has increased 20, 30-fold over the past decade. And in order to meet the demand, what you're finding is these plantation owners are clearing rainforests and replacing them with palm plantations. I mean, that is the worst thing you can do from an environmental sustainability standpoint. And, you know, companies like P&G and others have set goals to stop deforestation. And for us, there's several ways of approaching it. About 2/3 of our palm oil comes from very, very large plantations. And about 1/3 comes from small independent farmers. These are people that maybe have a farm of 5 hectares, small family farm or so. We can very easily go in and mandate to the large plantation owners how they should operate, how they should behave to prevent deforestation. And it's easy for them to comply because they have the resources to do that. The small independent farmer can't do that. And in fact, I've had the opportunity to go to Malaysia and Indonesia and actually sit down and meet with these people. Most of them don't even know they're part of an environmental issue. I mean, they're just trying to make ends meet for their family and whatever. So, you know, you can go down a path and cut all them out and solve your issue by just working with the large plantations and dictating conditions for them. So your issue is resolved. Or you can look at this then as a long-term necessity to fix this for growth. And we have a program now with these small farmers where we're stepping in now, helping to improve their farming practices, so now they can be part of this whole program that's going forward to end deforestation. And that's really where you get into this complexity of things, that there's a short-term, simple way to fix it, or there's a long-term fix that then really will create a situation that everybody benefits. And I think that's a key part as we look at all this stuff. Sometimes there's always this however, I tell everybody, you know, there's always a however with all of these issues. And you always got to look at that social piece when you address the environmental piece.
This is an interesting, very interesting example about the palm oil. It strikes me that in the corporate social responsibility literature from the institutional political economy approaches, one of the best known propositions is that organized dialogue with stakeholders tends to move corporations in the direction of more socially responsible activity. And there's a different piece of this too that allows me to segue into an institutional political economy approach, which is distinguishing between social and environmental. One of the traditions that we have come to at the workshop in institutional analysis is to try to treat them in an integrated manner as social ecological systems. And that's because very often the best awareness of what the conditions on the ground, particularly in small and medium scale kinds of situations, are with the local users and with the local participants on the ground situation, rather than the distant experts, even distant experts in the capital city of the country that you're in. And that is particularly important because it turns out that the traditional literature believed that to solve the risk or the tragedy of the commons, you had to either have the state step in and take charge in a command and control fashion, or you had to enclose the commons into parcels of private property and let the market take over. And it turns out that that's not the case, that those are the only two options. There is a third option, and that is a self-organizing community governance. And it turns out that there are actually thousands of such cases. And so this has been one of the major scholarly achievements of the last 2 decades to explain the principles by which communities self-manage. And so if you have this interaction with a very prominent, powerful, wealthy actor coming in for their market purposes, this kind of organized dialogue is a special key, in my opinion, to ensuring that you don't destroy the base of self-sustaining activity that is taking place, but rather complement it and perhaps provide information about linkages to broader systems that may not be known because of your expertise that you can do.
And I just add that they are of great value when you have the lines of communications open up down. P&G has 80,000 suppliers. And each of those suppliers has suppliers, and each of those suppliers have suppliers. So you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of companies that are supplying you raw materials. We do have principles by which we expect suppliers to act. We audit a cross-section of them, but it is impossible for us to go and see every supplier and making sure they're acting according to the principles of the company. We rely on these lines of communication with these local groups to tell us when someone is acting inappropriately, and then we will go and investigate that. And it's key on both ends. They have the trust that if they tell us something, we will act, and we have to do that. We have to act to build that trust. And then when that happens, you know that these groups will take the time to tell you if something's inappropriate. And again, it's in our best interest to know if someone's not acting appropriately. Everybody wants to be a supplier for Procter & Gamble, so we can pick and choose who it is, and then we very easily move to those that are most responsible.
Part of this, this part of the conversation feels to me to be very rooted in a long-term view. That doesn't feel very American to me. Am I right or wrong about that? And help me, how do you convince people who are not already taking the long-term view? Or am I wrong? Is American industry and American investors more long-term in view than I am thinking as a former business editor?
Yeah, I'll start out with that one because it's a common question that I receive from the people that provide oversight and governance of the work that I do. We make the case that we need to pursue this particular action because it's good for the long term. Well, how do you know that? Well, here's the case. Here's why we think it is. Can you prove it? Well, no, it's going to take about 15, 20, 30, 50 years to prove it. Well, 15, 20, 30 years from now, none of us are going to be here. You know, we want action now. We want to see results now. And so there's an inherent problem in this country for instant gratification, to be able to immediately prove that an action that is going to be taken is going to result in a positive action. And that's an inherent barrier that's standing in the way of more sustainable long-term thinking.
I'll say that it reminds me of a cartoon from the New Yorker of post-apocalyptic, post-climate change scenario, and a few people are sitting around, huddled around a fire, and one is reminiscing about how for a brief golden time they created shareholder value. And so this is, and I think this summarizes some of the problem. And actually, it's a paradox in the literature. Why is it that corporations who are expected to maximize profits and to maximize shareholder value should care about social responsibility, right? There's a paradox why they do. And that's why the conversation we're having here, I think, is so powerful and so important, because there is an answer that my own research niche points us towards, which is it has to do with institutions. And institutions are rules that tell us what we may not, or must do. Right? And they're often the results of legal settlements. They're sometimes the results of bargains. They're sometimes the results of habits and patterns of interaction. But they're also the results of ideas and ethics. And so one of the most important reasons why the Common Word document which is such an important breakthrough, is that it lays an ethical foundation in an authoritative manner that applies to people who are Muslims and Christians, non-Muslims and non-Christians, religious or non-religious. And that foundation is the golden rule.